This podcast is brought to you with the support of Sacred Rites. You can find more information about their work in public scholarship at sacred-rites.org. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Laine Walters Young. Laine Walters Young is the Assistant Director of the Cal Turner Program for Moral Leadership in the Professions at Vanderbilt University. She received her PhD from Vanderbilt in Religion, Psychology, and Culture, and considers herself a feminist care ethicist working at the intersection of psychology and ethics. She has experience in nonprofit administration, as well as a Master of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, where she studied religion and public life, storytelling, and the possibilities of pluralism. At the Cal Turner program, she directs the Interprofessional Student Fellowship at Vanderbilt, a group of master's level students who journey together over a year to deepen their moral awareness and gain leadership skill. On this episode, we discuss morality, moral courage, and moral resiliency, as well as her book project, Leadership Through Duress, Moral Courage for Our Times. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Laine Walters Young. Dr. Laine Walters Young, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Thank you.
I'm delighted that you're here. I'm wondering if we can kick this off by having you introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners so they know just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
All right. Yes. I am a psychologically informed feminist care ethicist, which is a lot of words, but hopefully I can explain myself as we go along. I work in co-curricular programming with professional students at Vanderbilt University. We have an endowment-funded program called the Cal Turner Program for Moral Leadership in the Professions. And so I get to work with students from across the university, and that's a lot of fun. Law students, business students, healthcare, even engineering and human development as well.
What do they come to you to learn about and to get better at?
Yeah, they come to me to work over the academic year on issues of moral leadership. And I know one of our questions coming up is, how did I get into moral leadership? Well, there happened to be a position open at the place where I had done my dissertation, done my doctoral work, and that fitted together really well. So a large part about moral leadership, as I come to find out, is having the courage to take what you know to be right and put it into actual action.
Wonderful. I'd love to know a little bit about your path in scholarship. Like, everybody's story for how they came to do what they do is always super interesting to me. How did you find your way to caring about your research areas of morality, moral courage, moral resiliency, and care? I'm just curious about kind of that pathway that you took.
Yeah. I fell in love with the intersection of psychology and ethics while studying for my master's degree at Harvard Divinity. I found a scholar whose work I really loved, and I loved how it was possible to think so analytically and systematically about things that are really relevant to our personal lives. People didn't actually know that you could study counseling, but from an ethical point of view. So I think that's really under-researched in my opinion, and I absolutely love it. And it was like, if I could study this for the rest of my life, I could see a career in academia. So for my dissertation, I wrote about millennials as young adults and their ethical expectations for their intimate lives. I found that there was a need for ways to talk about what people want and desire in life, ways that didn't quite exist the way I wanted them to. So at the Cal Turner program, I actually have the ability to help develop ethical heuristics, ways of thinking through our morals and our vision and how we want to live them out in the world.
I'd love to know a little bit about your PhD program. How did you kind of hone in on what it is that you wanted to study long-term in that program?
Yeah, so my degree is, the area of study is called Psychology, Religion, and Culture. And within that, we do a lot of cultural studies, as the title indicates. And so I was interested in doing a very vast overview of how things work together. I was interested in literally how psychology affects our ethics, our expectations, our behaviors, what we think is possible, what we aspire to, and how we try to get there. I've always been interested in morality. And when I realized that you could study in a really practical, psychologically informed way, I was just thrilled and was interested in having a career in academia, which is not what I had planned. I trained as a journalist, and journalists tend to be very secular, but I've always been interested in morality and in transformation from both an individual and a societal level. I was raised in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, and there were 3 years of catechism to get confirmed as an eighth grader. And I ate it up. I love theology. I love thinking about the church and the right and the wrong and the way that a particular expression of Christianity did that. I thought it was the best thing ever. And I didn't want to become a minister, though a lot of people thought that ministry was what I was going to do with that interest. But ministry is a very extroverted profession, or at least I thought it was. I've come to find out that that's not exactly true. But concentrating on morality all day and what I do works really well for me.
Awesome. Well, I know that you are working on a book project in this area. I believe that the working title is Leadership Through Duress, Moral Courage for Our Times. Um, I would love to know, I know this project is in the works and it's still in development, but I'd love to know about the origin of Leadership Through Duress.
Thank you. Yes. That is its tentative title. We are workshopping a variety of things. But I originally, you mentioned Templeton before we got on to recording this call.
Mm.
I originally got a Templeton grant for studying moral courage and civil rights together, and going down to Montgomery, which is one of the important hotbeds and lessons for moral leadership in our time. And that was very exciting. I was all prepared to be one of the scholars in residence for the first time in my sort of junior career, and was very excited to talk with people about this. And it turns out that the program, which was Templeton money but given to the University of Alabama at Auburn, uh, the administrators decided that they were going to possibly run afoul of the divisive concepts law. So I prepped to give what I thought was going to be a civic focused presentation on the moral courage work I've been doing with professional leaders. And then I didn't get it. I got this rushed call saying, events have been canceled. We're probably still going to pay you for being a scholar because it's partly investing in your research, but there will be no output of this work. And I thought a long time about how disappointed I was that I didn't get to share this with other people who are interested in moral leadership in a civic space. Everyday people beyond the wonderful professional students that I get to work with at Vanderbilt, but who are definitely top of their class. And I have always been interested in reaching everyday people in addition to working with the brilliant students at Vanderbilt. So I thought about getting into a variety of ways of doing public scholarship that would get that material that I prepared out into the world. And that's when I started thinking about the book, and I applied to Scholars as Storytellers with the Christian Century and the Narrative Project, and then got in. So that's why we're here today, is because I thought courage needed to be out there. And I have some points on why courage is important if you'd like to hear them.
I would love to know. Tell me a little bit about the purpose of the project and what it is that you are trying to get across with why courage matters.
Sure. So I have three main points. First is that courage is an essential thing to employ to act against dehumanization, against oppression, and in short, against people who are taking more than their fair share and dominating others in the process. So courage is different than helping behavior because it involves taking on potential risk and backlash for intervening. So you have to have the emotional regulation to modulate the very fear that most actors very realistically and understandably have. And I can tell, there was fear in those administrators who canceled our civic events and changed it into much less controversial programming as they scrambled to still spend some of the money. So I understand that fear. And I want to take that fear seriously in the work that I do. You have to have a belief that standing up for humanity is worth the cost, no matter what that cost may be. And if you don't deal with your fear, if you don't have a goal in mind for why it's worth taking that risk for backlash, social backlash, but maybe physical risk as well, then you're not going to be a courageous moral leader. You're not going to be one of the best of human beings that you can be. So I'm impressed that people can take huge risks to protect people from genocides around the world, of social change movements like the civil rights movement, which James Lawson, who I'll refer to in a minute, actually calls the nonviolent movement, not the civil rights movement, because nonviolence was a much broader field that he was trying to take on. But people in change movements try to reduce stigma, reduce discrimination, strengthen justice and inclusion. And yet most people are not morally courageous. And I wanted to know more about why that was. And since I'm in practical ethics, what we could do about that. So that's why I'm writing the book. That's the first one.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Okay. The second is courage is also known as part of the solution to moral injury. There's a growing understanding in society that we are morally injured by what we do in our work, what we do in our professions, by humanity-made limits and decisions that grieve our hearts. Moral injury makes us truly doubt the goodness of the world and the goodness of ourselves. And as my colleague and I have been working on the issue of moral injury in the professions over the past few years, when we talk to people about it, they're like, oh, yeah, I've experienced moral injury. I know what that's about. And it'll often be in situations that don't meet the classical definition of betrayal or commission or omission. But what they're seeing is sort of an accumulated running down of decisions they couldn't make, choices they couldn't act upon that really reduce their moral quality of life for themselves and others. So one of the redresses to moral injury is moral courage. It can help prevent situations in the beginning and help repair a little bit from all the damage. And third, I'm always interested in myths. And there's a lot of myths around courage that aren't true. People think about courage as having a megaphone, of being out there on the streets, protesting, getting up in people's faces, confronting enforcement. And we think about spontaneity. But a lot of that is not true. The example of the Montgomery bus boycott, for instance, during the nonviolent civil rights era, was about thousands of Montgomeryans who walked or carpooled for 381 days, more than a year. They stayed off the bus system, which they were its main clientele. And ultimately, the Montgomery bus system went bankrupt for clinging to white supremacy rather than making decisions to keep its business afloat. So courage is real risk and sacrifices by people, but it's also preparation and organization and collaboration.
Yeah, and what's really interesting too to me is like the opening chapter in the book. It's like this question of why don't we do something, right? I've often asked myself that, like, why don't I do more, or what can I do? Because there's so many horrors in the world. Tell me a little bit about like ordinary people and what you think about that question. Why don't we do something in relation to just the ordinary people in society every single day that are just going about our lives?
Yeah, I talk with people about this, even people who I think are leaders in the field, and then they confess to me. I get a lot of confessions as somebody who works with a lot of faith leaders and social change activists that they actually feel less courageous, less confident than what I can observe of them. But I think human beings in general, they do feel more powerless than they actually are. Everyone, the best leaders and down through the middle to the bottom. I think particularly in the information and technology age, we're aware, as you said, of all those things that we know we can't fix, that we know are wrong. And it knocks our moral self-esteem down a bit, to say the least. In this time, screens and other distractions and bombs, I think we're comfortable enough. And we're familiar with our values in a way that makes them feel achievable and concrete. When you do that, when you make them feel achievable and concrete rather than amorphous, like you don't know what to do, that's important enough to get off the couch. But I
Yeah.
think often people don't make that connection between caring about safety or caring about dignity to the point that they see a real difference. I think we
Mm.
get in our heads and we're like, oh, that won't make a difference. That's not, I'm not loud. I'm not supposed to be a leader or an organizer. And I recently said to somebody, but you can stuff envelopes, but you can meet one-on-one, you can make some calls. The Montgomery bus boycott was successful not only because of the people who refused to give up their seats, but the English professor at the local university who jumped into action because they'd been discussing this for years about boycotting the bus company because of the treatment and created leaflets by, I think Rosa Parks didn't get up on Thursday or Friday, and by Monday, the boycott was in effect because
Mm.
over the weekend they reached out to everyone. And so I think that's really important to think about that level of quiet and that level of organizing and being clear about what you want. I've been a Christian my whole life, and we're in the season of Lent right now. And it's a time of fasting so that you can focus on honesty and authenticity and what we truly desire, which for Christians should hopefully include God and usually does. But along with that, that's a world of peace and wholeness, of flourishing. And so I usually give up Netflix
Hmm.
during Lent. But this year I gave up Netflix and social media because I'm becoming rather addicted to my phone and to that serotonin hit of something new.
Yeah.
But despite having practiced Lent, I really doubted that this would lead to hearing my inner voice better. But it has. We're only about a week into Lent, and the first few days were rough with some withdrawal, but I really had no idea to what degree I had crowded out my own inner voice from exhaustion and numbness and social media noise. There's also a bunch of people who just don't care or haven't been taught or given the opportunity to make a difference, but I'm not as focused on that. I think there's a lot of people who, if we give them a guidebook and some assurance, can be nudged and accompanied into action.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the reduction of use of social media, if you ever are looking for a book to read on that topic, you could check out a book called The Shallows: What the Internet is Doing to Our Brain by a
Oh,
writer I
uh-huh.
really love named Nicholas Carr. So there's my recommendation for you on that topic.
Excellent.
So, as somebody who looks at moral courage and morality in general, I'm wondering if there's any like survey data or anything like that about the state of morality as a concept that you felt like listeners should know about.
Yeah, I have lots of social scientific musings because that's sort of what a religion, psychology, and culture person does. But I don't have any survey data because the type of morality I'm interested in is really hard to track. There is this thing that's pretty standard in the field called the defining issues test, but it doesn't necessarily follow the type of treatment I'm thinking of. And the DTI is, or the DIT is 50 years old. So I think, as we've already discussed, our political and our economic environments are creating a bunch of nihilism and cynicism as a cultural milieu. And I think most recently, a whole lot of fear.
Hmm.
And fear is pretty important in courage. You have to be able to regulate it, you have to work with it. Um, One of the misnomers about the misconceptions about fear is that people who act courageously don't have fear. They absolutely do have fear, but something is more important. And for that reason, they're able to regulate it and hold on to it and use it productively.
So I'd love to know about some modern day dissenters displaying moral courage now, today in 2026, that any listeners now and in the future can see as being like, okay, this is a really clear example of what we're talking about.
Absolutely. I think the neighborliness of Minneapolis and the Minnesotans have turned the what's being coined as the constitutional observer movement of having tons of witnesses to the inhumane behavior of ICE is an example of moral courage. Remix Tennessee here in Nashville is also organizing behind the scenes locally to make sure that people have basic necessities if they're too scared to leave their homes. And so a lot of the neighbors, in addition to being on the streets with their dime whistles and the cameras in Minneapolis, are also doing a lot of mutual aid. They're providing money and food and legal access. But given that it's only February, I think there's a lot left for the year to develop in terms of censorship and restriction of freedoms. I like to think that the networks in Minnesota and in Chicago and LA, the main places where ICE has been in the last year, have created strategies for people to employ as things get worse in our own neighborhoods, and that we learn from each other. As you know, I'm a big fan of Reverend James Lawson, He was considered the philosopher and architect of the civil rights nonviolent movement of the 1950s and 60s. It was so much more than rights. And why Lawson's example matters now is that he trained young activists in the strategies and methods of nonviolence that were demonstrations. He didn't call them protests, and neither does Minnesota say that they're protesting. They're saying that they are revealing, that they are witnessing, that they are protecting um, what they know to be good and true, which is freedom and liberty for their neighbors. But those trained here in Nashville by Lawson went throughout the Southeast using their training to pressure leaders into giving up on segregation. So I see that sort of as what we're doing here today in terms of people training in their cities, gaining experience, and then sharing it with others where those needs pop up. I see that same type of resistance as crucial to teaching people how to play their part and giving some people larger stages on which to act.
Do you have any suggestions for what any like shy or introverted folks who really believe in everything that you're saying and want to be a little more involved? What suggestions do you have for people who might feel the need to work on their own courageousness in their way, myself included?
Yeah, well, while I am working on putting my book together, I have another one to recommend. And that is the book entitled How We Learn to Be Brave by Episcopal Bishop Marion Buddy, who serves in the Diocese of Washington, D.C. It's a short, easy read about everyday circumstances, and it was written a few years ago. She made the press when she, as the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C., gave a inaugural worship service, and in her sermon, she implored the Trump administration to have mercy as they went about their political aims. Um, and so it's not a surprise that she said what she thought needed to be said after having written this book. But if you're wondering why you should read a book, she's been in this for a while. She expands the reader's conception that courage has a particular timeline. Again, that it's spontaneous. Courage is a lot about endurance. You have to commit over and over and over again to what you've decided. You need to reassess your risk. You need to keep hiding somebody. You need to keep showing up. You need to keep making your voice heard. And before I got heavily into my own research, her book showed me the importance of preparation and of quiet moments. And she also acknowledged backlash and failure in ways that I hadn't seen done before. And so it's really honest and comforting, and I recommend it.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to know a little bit about your work with sacred rights as well. I know you're doing some trainings in public scholarship. How has that been for you?
Yeah, it has been fabulous. I am working with scholars as storytellers because it helps me retrain my brain away from the jargon and use my intellectual curiosity to really winnow in on what's important. I want people to read the book I'm writing. I want it to be very scholarly astute and based on research and what social science has shown to be true across professions and across settings. But I want it to make a difference. I'm in a position where I don't need tenure, and so I can write a book for the public, and I'm really grateful for that. So I want to help the next community of witnesses and resistance to atrocity. And if I want to do that, I need to be clear, helpful, and straight to the point.
Excellent. What are some of your goals in public scholarship that you are working on?
Well, I am writing working toward a piece on James Lawson, which is the recently named brand new public high school, which my son is actually part of the feeder cluster. So he may stay and go to James Lawson High School out here in Bellevue, where we live, should he decide not to go to a magnet downtown. And right now, he's very excited to go to James Lawson. The school was named that unanimously by the school board. And when that was announced that the new school being built from scratch out on a previous farm in Bellevue was going to be named after the civil rights leader, a lot of Nashvillians didn't know who he was. And come to find out, a book was just released about Lawson that he co-authored with a journalist. And Apparently, the fact that nobody knew who he was absolutely by design. Because while everybody else was out in front, getting arrested, doing the things, he stayed behind and didn't go on the street so that he could keep organizing while everybody else was in jail. Somebody needed to be there to get them freed, to organize the next action. And so he actually, Emily Yellen describes that he turns away in pictures. He's not in the media, he's not quoted. He resisted having his biography, his memoir, excuse me, written for some time because he was not an out in front person. But the James Lawson Cluster has decided to have a leadership effort that rewards students for pursuing the characteristics of James Lawson. So, thinking before you speak, acting strategically, spreading positivity, being a mentor and a teacher, and acting courageously. And I have to say that I was thrilled, a little conflict of interest here. My son was awarded one of the honors for spreading positivity and also being courageous because they've revamped it to where it's not just an award once a month, but that they're really trying to recognize when children are doing these things. And I think it really reaffirms for the kids that they have agency, that they can see things that need to be improved and do something about them that is in an age-appropriate way.
Excellent. Well, where can people find you or follow along with your projects if they want to keep in touch or if they want to, be receiving updates for books and other projects?
Yeah, you can find me personally by looking me up on Facebook, Laine Walters Young. My last name is Walters Young. Or more professionally, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to me directly through one of those mechanisms or find an email address. And I am happy to talk with people about their views, their questions, their experiences of moral courage anytime.
Excellent. Dr. Laine Walters Young, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to me about morality, moral courage, and your project, Leadership Through Duress. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you.